to Story Talks Back. Almost everything that we remember, think about, or imagine is a story. Stories entertain us, inform us, and even define us. They have upsides, and they have downsides. This podcast explores the power of story in every aspect of our lives. I'm Dave Stanton. Thank you for joining us. Born in London, Gered Mankowitz established his first photography studio in 1963 at age 17, as the British rock and blues movements were about to explode. He started working with the Rolling Stones soon after, touring the U.S. with the then-fledgling band, and producing several of their early album covers. Mankowitz quickly became a sought-after rock lensman, capturing timeless images of major stars from the 1960s through today. Jimi Hendrix, the Yardbirds, Traffic, Marianne Faithful, Elton John, Free, Kate Bush, Eurythmics, George Harrison, Paul McCartney and Wings, Sparks, Sade, Oasis, and countless others. Mankowitz has continued to work in the music business as well as contributing to many leading magazines and also taking prize-winning advertising photos. In 2013, he published a retrospective book, Gered Mankowitz, 50 Years of Rock and Roll Photography, and he was executive producer of the 6-part TV series Icon Music Through the Lens, which aired on PBS in 2020. Well, Gered Mankowitz, it's great to welcome you to the Story Talks Back. We really appreciate your time today.
It's a pleasure. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to me. I want to talk to you about stories and storytelling in your life, and how they may have influenced your career as a photographer and visual artist. So I wonder if you can think about whether there were any stories or storytellers in your past, your childhood, or your formative years, either visual or textual, who may have had an influence on you personally.
Okay. Well, my father was a storyteller, so he had a huge influence on me. My father was a writer and a poet and a producer and a screenwriter and he wrote plays and musicals, and so he had a huge influence on me, and language was always incredibly important to him. And as a reaction to that, I didn't really learn to read until I was about 9 or 10. I think I was dyslexic, although nobody talked about dyslexia back in the sort of early 50s. But I think I was dyslexic because spelling has always been a tremendous problem for me. And the arrival of computers and Word and spell correcting software has been a great boon and benefit both to the quality of my writing and the ability to cover up my inefficient spelling. But my dad was a huge influence in many different ways. I mean, his storytelling was important, and he was always very keen on literature and plays and films as well. So yeah, all of that had a huge influence. And I think because I was always a very visual person, and I have no idea when that first started, except I'm just thinking back now, the visual aspects of all forms of theatre and film have always interested me, and photography. So yes, all of those things have been incredibly important to me from pretty much as early as I can remember. And our whole lifestyle really was based upon storytelling in one form or another.
Are there other aspects of your life or your lifestyle that you remember that feel like they were kind of immersed in stories?
Well, it's a, it's it's difficult to know because my father wrote, like most writers, he wrote an awful lot about what he knew, and some of that was about not us directly, not the family directly, but his background in the East End of London. Um, that played a big part, especially in his early career, and so it filtered through, it infiltrated, its impact on all of us. Our lives, it revolved around his career. As he became successful, the standards of our life improved, and so it was all connected with his ability to write and to communicate and to do so successfully. So in that sense, storytelling has been an incredibly major part of my life. But I think that I've always, now whether it was in some sort of reaction to him as a writer, I've always been much more interested in the visual interpretation, how you get it on the stage, how you get it on the screen, how you get it in a photograph. That's always interested me more than actually writing about it. And I've always felt that storytelling was an important aspect of my photography. And in my early days as a photographer back in London in the 1960s, I actually did a lot of book covers.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and I loved that. In fact, it was probably one of the most creatively exciting periods of my life. So what would happen would be that an editor at the publisher would supply me with a paragraph of what they felt were important aspects of a particular book. Usually there wasn't time to read the book, but I would get these sort of potted précis of the book, plus a paragraph or so of things that they thought might make a cover. And then I would discuss with the art director, we'd come up with a concept, and I'd go off and I'd do it. And the budgets were so small, they were so infinitesimal, that I had to do everything myself. So I did the makeup. So I did everything. I mean, I had a sort of part-time assistant in those late 60s days. And I used to use him to experiment on my makeup. we used something, because I was doing thrillers and detective stories and murder stories. There were a lot of corpses involved. So I'd send him home with a bullet hole in his forehead, and he'd go on the London Tube, sort of apparently bleeding profusely from a great hole in his forehead, things like that. And I built sets out of, paper and sticks, and I had a wonderful time. It was creatively extremely expressive and enjoyable, and of course directly linked to storytelling. So I was trying to capture the feeling of the book in a dramatic visual way, and I think I must have done, I don't want to get the figures wrong, but round about 60 or 70 book jackets in quite a focused period, and it led me to a very important working relationship with a man who owned one of the stages at Pinewood Studios. And Pinewood Studio was one of the biggest London film studios, and it had been owned by a huge company called J. Arthur Rank. They're like Warner Brothers or Universal. And it was at a point when the big studios were beginning to change the way they functioned. And this guy, his name was Cliff Cully, he took over what was called the matte studio. I won't go into matte painting, but basically it's a special effect whereby you film part of a scene and then a matte artist draws or paints the rest of the scene. And it's a fantastic skill, wonderful part of filmmaking in the 20th century. And I loved it. He had a little stage, and I met him. I can't remember how I met him, but I met him and I told him about my book jackets and how I wanted to expand the way I did them, make them more elaborate. And I started doing them on his stage, and he would paint backgrounds, and I would have all the facilities of Pinewood Studios for a fraction of the money. It was a wonderful relationship. I mean, I made no money out of the book jackets. It all went in to the company. But I loved it, and I learned so much about lighting, about casting, styling, doing makeup, bullet holes, and special effects. I mean, you know, we did a Bond type, James Bond type spoof series, and we had boats on fire and flames coming out of, you know, it was really exciting, great fun. And I spent all the money on the job, but I learned so much. It was a fantastic time, and all directly related to storytelling and make-believe and fantasy. And yeah, it was a wonderfully creative period.
And thinking about, you know, even your, you know, portraits of people like Jimi Hendrix and Stones, you know, I mean, were you thinking of all these people as characters? And do you think that some of them thought of themselves as characters?
Ah, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. It's a question that I've never really thought about or been asked about. I think that when you photograph musicians, certainly in the way that I photograph musicians, because in general they came to me, they came to my studio. I'm a studio-based photographer, and I have been since I started. That doesn't mean to say I don't work on location, and I have shot a lot of live photography, but primarily I'm a studio-based photographer, and my subjects come to me. And part of the process is not so much looking at them as characters. In fact, I think looking at them as real people who perform, looking at them as performers, but recognizing they're real people.
Mm-hmm.
And real people don't really like having their pictures taken in general. I mean, I think that is changing now as our culture and society changes, but back then, people generally, you could assume and be safe that people didn't like having their pictures taken. But Jimi Hendrix, the performer, had to do it. It was part of the job. And I think recognizing that, understanding that, communicating with the person on that basis. I understand you're not really very comfortable in front of the camera, but we have to promote your record. We have to do your cover. We have to get you out there, and photography is really an important part of the job. And so it was a question of engaging with people and not necessarily creating a character, but trying to understand the character they wanted to project. And of course, with young men, and so many of the people I photographed were young men in their late teens, early 20s, you know, in general, you could sum their desires up as to being, you know, sexy. You know, they all really wanted to be sexy, you know, and in one way or another. So that was really a big part of the job, I think. Not seeing them as characters, but helping them find the character that they could be in order to communicate what they wanted to be as a musician. It's a clumsy way of putting it, but I think that sort of sums it up.
No, I think that's really good. I mean, was that collaboration more often unspoken, or was it often really explicit?
I think it was explicit. I don't think it was that discussed that much at the beginning, but I think that quite soon. So for instance, I think when I met the Stones, which was late 64, and I started working with them, I think around about April 65, I don't think we sat down to discuss what they would project in the photographs. But by the time I was working with Hendrix in 67, early in 67, I think I'd refined my process somewhat. I mean, I had to, because when I started working with the Stones, you know, I was only a couple of years into my career. I was only 18. You know, I had to evolve quite quickly, and you learn by your mistakes, or at least you improve by recognizing your limitations and your mistakes and working on it. So by 67, you know, I hope I was a better photographer. And I with Jimmy, I was able to discuss it perhaps more implicitly. But usually, I mean, I've always seen it as a collaboration, even if it's an unspoken collaboration. And I've always seen that, I've always felt that it was more important to understand my subject's music rather than necessarily like it. You know, I didn't care very much for Hendrix's music the first time I heard it. I found it raucous and it went over my head. I didn't get it. I mean, I grew to get it, but initially when I first heard him, I just thought, but what I saw immediately was this extraordinary vision, this, you know, extraordinary looking man. And regardless of what he was playing, I wanted to photograph him and try and get that across. But always at the same time trying to get across, trying to touch the human being, you know, because that's, for instance, with Jimmy, with most of the pictures of Jimmy, that's what moves people. I think that they see a person, you know, not just the image. So it's quite complex, and it doesn't bear a huge amount of scrutiny, and a lot of it's instinctive. But yes, I think it's a collaborative relationship, which in most cases is discussed or spoken, and more as the times progress, by the mid 70s, even the early 70s, artists are becoming much more knowing about what they want to project, and so we have specific discussions about it, not just about, you know, oh, my nose is too big, can you photograph me from this angle so it looks smaller, not just sort of rubbish like that, but much more explicit about, you know, what should I be wearing, or how should I present this, or can you help me with this because I really don't know whether it's right or not. And you know, one has those sort of conversations. And then you have artists like Kate Bush, who are very theatrical, and you know, you want to express, you want to try and capture something, tell the story. So when she had an album called The Kick Inside, which I repackaged for the American market because the Americans didn't like the original British sleeve. I put her in a box, you know, with her not contorted, but in such a way that she is apparently kicking inside the box. And yeah, it's not rocket science, but it helps tell the story and sell the album and relate the artist to what they're selling.
And then you used the same box on the cover of Lionheart, right?
Yes, we did. Yeah, I don't throw anything away. You know, I stuck the box in my garden. No, actually, it was in the shed. We kept the box. I didn't know why we didn't use it for any other shoot except for Lionheart, but it seemed perfect. I don't think many people made any sort of subliminal connection between the two albums. Maybe they did. Nobody's really ever said that to me. She needed a perch, and in the attic, which we built in the studio, it's a set. So there's storytelling, you know, very vivid, powerful storytelling just in building a set. Goes back to everything I was saying earlier on about my interest in the visual storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the sessions that I really was thinking of in terms of storytelling, because it's such a clear, fantasy that you're exploring with her, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there is, I mean, when we talked about the Lionheart cover, I thought she was recounting a dream she had, but it turned out that it was a dream that her brother had had, which she liked and relayed to me about this young girl who goes up to, I think, her grandmother's attic and finds an animal costume hidden in the attic. And from there, we constructed Lionheart, and I can't remember whether I chose the animal or she chose the animal, or we had a discussion about it. I know that I rented the lion's head from a fancy dress shop, and then we had the body made so that it fitted her, perfectly. And as I say, she needed a perch, and so the box, the kick inside box, just it was the right thing to do without being too, I think, obvious about the connection with the previous album.
To me, it represented, her sort of coming into her own after the first album, which, became such a smash, and there were so many expectations. And, her in the lion suit to me said, I am the lion, and I'm taking ownership of that.
Yes, that's interesting. And I mean, you could also say she's coming out, literally coming out. She's coming out of the box, and she's free and she's unrestrained. And of course, having a male lion's head seemed to me to be quite important. It seemed to be more powerful. I don't know, I'm not sure how much scrutiny any of this stands up to. We certainly, it was most of the time, I think we were having fun. Yes, we were trying very hard to create a really good package. I was always very conscious of the fact that what you created had to be a poster, a press photo. It had to sell. I mean, I was always very clear that we were selling. That was the job. I mean, we were selling, and I always wanted to try and make it as creative and as artistic and as true to the artist and as beautiful of the artist as I could make it. But we're selling. I mean, this is why the original album cover, the original British Kick Inside cover, didn't work. This is why nobody liked it at EMI, because it wasn't a good selling cover. You couldn't work with it or use it. And so that's an important part of what I do. And that is storytelling as well, communicating with the buying public, with the marketplace, what you're trying to do, selling a story, telling them a story.
But did you ever have, conflicts between what you saw as being the right approach and what the record company or the artist wanted to project?
Well, not often, actually, because you have to be very open when I'm not taking the photographs for myself. The subject is always the hero, and so I've got to try and put myself in their shoes, in their place. So, but there was a band, and they were very good. They were a British band called Smokey, and they came from a little town called Bradford. And for their first album, I saw them as a sort of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, a British Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And I wanted to do a sort of, I can't remember the name of the album. They did the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young did a great album cover with Henry Diltz, I think, when they were all dressed as cowboys on the...
Deja Vu?
Anyway, I can't remember what... Maybe Deja Vu, I can't remember. But that was the influence. And I got a really strong bee in my bonnet about this is who they were. And it was... I think it was the only time when I really got it wrong. We did a lovely cover and we did a fantastic session, but actually they just weren't those people. It was an interesting situation where they made great music, and in some ways I think their music might have even had a bit of Neil Young to it. I don't know now. I haven't listened to it for ages. But I was completely wrong in my interpretation. They just didn't like it. They wanted to be pop stars. You know, they wanted to wear tight leather trousers and have big bulges in their crotches. And they wanted to be sexy rock stars. They didn't want to be funky. And I thought Bradford was a great place. I even on the inner sleeve, I got into this thing about, do you know what I mean by stonewalling? You know that in the north of England, and also where I live down in the Cornwall, but in the north of England, the Lake District, and there's a lot of stonewalling. So they build dry stone walls, and it's very textural, it's very pretty. It's particularly in sheep country. And I had this feeling that Bradford ended at a stone wall, and there was a stone wall, and then there was a field, and then there was the city the other side of the stone wall. And and then there was a beautiful viaduct that we had a steam train driving across it. I just had this sort of ridiculously stupid romantic idea of where they came from, that it was important. And I think we did a lovely cover. I mean, it was all used and everything, and it was all hand tinted in a sort of old fashioned way, but it was just so out of sync with the band's story. You know, they wanted to get away from Bradford. They didn't want to go back to Bradford. So anyway, but most of the time, I didn't get it that wrong.
When you're actually in the studio, you know, you've done all the preparation, but it comes to the time of the shoot. What is it that you contribute? How is it that you approach letting the story come through? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, that's also another interesting question. In the studio, in a way, you contribute everything, really. You know, the studio is a dark space. You switch a light on, you put up a background, you tell your subject where to stand, and then you have to try and find a way of bringing your subject out and communicating a feeling to the camera. And so you create a space in which the subject can do that. And you create an atmosphere and a vibe between the two of you, with the camera in between, so that that person can give something of themselves to the camera, but they look, with the lighting and the clothes that they're wearing, the background that you give them, they look, you know, like a rock star, but they give you something human to communicate with when you look back at the picture. That's why most of my pictures, the subject is looking straight out, because then their eyes will follow you wherever you are. and you know, that's what you want. You want your subject, you want your viewer to feel they're looking straight into the heart and soul of your subject. So you've got to try and create everything and give them the space in which to do that. And some people do it naturally and instinctively, and other people need a lot of encouragement, and others need, you know, a space to occupy or a set to lean on. They need more support. Jimi Hendrix just looked great. You know, I didn't really have to do much with him except make him feel that he could give me something, and that I wouldn't betray it. You know, that I was working for him. He was going to be the hero, and that I was doing everything I could to help him be that hero without imposing anything of me in the picture. And that was always very important to me. You know, there were an awful lot of photographers, particularly in the 60s, whose photography you could recognize almost instantly. And I never liked that. It always bothered me, that. I mean, I came to recognize how great a lot of them were, but when in my younger days, when I was, you know, um, sort of aggressive and full of myself and full of self-belief and bullshit, I didn't like that. I didn't want my photographs to be recognizable. I wanted them to be great photographs of whomever it was I was photographing.
You were talking about, doing things on shoestring, doing things spontaneously, you know. It seems to me like sometimes when you do things that way, they actually can bring out more inner meaning than if you really, really are hyper prepared. And so I wonder if looking back on some of your work, you have felt that there were themes there that you didn't even recognize at the time, that sort of have emerged for you in retrospect.
Well, I mean, inevitably a style. I mean, there's a Mankiewicz style. I know that, but it wasn't a conscious thing. I've always tried to adapt myself to whatever I thought was appropriate to the subject. I don't know really. I craved bigger budgets, and then when I got bigger budgets, I'm not sure whether the work was any better. I mean, I do think that a lot of the best work was when we didn't really know what the fuck we were doing, and we were just, busking it. When I was just, breaking the rules because I didn't know there were any rules to be broken, and that. And one of the things that happens as you become more experienced is that you learn what doesn't work. You learn that this isn't going to work. So when somebody comes in and they're full of gum and vigor and they say, I want to do this, and you've tried to do this 3-4 times before, and you know that it's not going to work because they don't understand the dynamics of a camera or a studio or a light or whatever. There is a big question mark as to whether you stifle that enthusiasm or whether you try it again, sort of half in the knowledge that you're going to fail, but always with the hope that you might succeed in a way that you couldn't before. So it's, experience is a great thing, but it's also can be a dangerous thing. It can inhibit your expression and your innovativeness. And it's always been important to me that the technical side of my photography in the studio, at least, is sort of not hidden, but doesn't get in the way of the relationship with the subject. So I try and get things working and set up before they arrive or while they're in the dressing room, if they're having a lot of makeup and hair. I try and do a lot of stuff, a lot of prep, so that it's not done in front of them or around them, because then they become secondary to the technology, and that's awful. It's one of the problems with digital as opposed to analog. But I mean, that's another discussion. But I try and kept that not hidden, but just done, out of the way, not important. If a light fails or something, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Go and have a cup of tea in the kitchen, and we'll sort it all out. Because nobody wants to feel that they're a pawn in a sort of technology game. They don't want to feel that. They want to always feel that they're the most important thing in the room.
Sure.
And yeah, so I don't know whether that answers that question.
No, that's a great answer. I mean, I remember one time I was interviewing a composer, and after I finished interviewing him, he sort of gave me a little lecture about how I had been comparing him to too many other composers in the interview, and that really turned him off. That he felt that for a good interview, you really had to not bring up too many other people.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of the same thing, that you
it's
want
true.
them to feel like they are the only thing that matters in that moment.
Absolutely. I remember going to photograph Mel Brooks in Hollywood for the cover of a magazine. And like all high-powered Hollywood stars and producers, we went to his office on the lot of Fox Studios, and I had this shot that I wanted to set up, and I was given access to the office, and I had quite a complicated lighting thing, and it was in the days before a lot of wireless stuff, so it was all cables connected to sensors. It was a real problem, and I had it all working beautifully. And then he arrived in this sort of mad cacophony of ideas and noises and farting and thoughts, and he was absolutely crazy and lovely. I mean, we had a wonderful time, and I told him what I was wanting to do, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's great, that's great." And I sat him down, and we were about to do the Polaroid just to make sure everything working, and I clicked the button, and nothing happened. And of course, being Mel Brooks, he straight away started telling me what wasn't working, what was wrong. You got to do this, you got to do that, take that wire out, put that wire in, do this, do that, do that. And he turned the whole thing into a Mel Brooks comedy routine, which was funny, but it wasn't hugely helpful.
That's great.
But anyway, we got it working. Again, I'm not sure whether that was an answer to a question.
No, these are great. This is great. I did want to actually talk to you about sort of the new digital processes versus the darkroom, and how that might have changed your approach to storytelling in your photographs, or how you sort of shape the texture and the whole story that you're working on.
Well, without getting too bogged down in the differences between film and digital, I think that I touched upon it just now. I think one of the problems with digital is that I'm thinking this through, because I find it quite a complicated thing. So when I'm fortunate in as much as digital photography only began to creep into my commercial work, to my commercial career for the last few years. And I didn't shoot much music stuff on digital. And the bulk, 99.9% of my stuff has always been on film. So that's taken care of. And digital has enabled me to revisit, all that stuff, all that material again, and, give my images a new life, because it wasn't practical or feasible to use some images in an analog way, but in a digital way, I can scan the negative or the transparency, and I can give them a new life. So that's been wonderful, and I've really enjoyed that hugely. But in terms of shooting with digital, one of the things that I hate about it is the way everybody in the room wants to see what you've just taken. There's no workflow. And so I call it pretentiously an analog pace in a digital space. So I unplug the camera, there's no monitor, there's no place where you can go and see the pictures. I unplug the camera, I sort of use the monitor purely in the way I would have used a Polaroid, and then I unplug the camera and I do it, and I shoot 12 shots in succession, the same as I would have done on a roll of medium format film. And so I recreate the analog pace of the analog atmosphere, the analog approach, but the end result is a digital file. And I find that works, because the moment everybody wants to look at the monitor, the makeup, the hair, the subject, the manager, the fucking security guy, they all want to look at the monitor. They're all seeing something else. The makeup person is only looking at the makeup. The clothes person is just, and the artist is just looking at the pimple on her fucking nose. And I don't want any of that. I don't want that focus, and you lose sight of what you're trying to do. And so I cut all that out. I don't want that. And which is probably why nobody asks me to take pictures anymore. But I don't want that. I can't bear that. It's like, I never liked taking photographs with other photographers in the room, which is why I was no good as a press photographer. I couldn't go to press calls. I just got completely inhibited by the presence of other photographers. And I don't want people seeing my work until it's ready to be seen. So the last thing I want to do is to have someone, looking at the image on a monitor when it's not ready, it's not finished, it's not there. And so that's my feeling about, from a storytelling point of view, for me, I have to try and recapture the pace of an analog shoot. And that, I find that works actually rather well, because I like the digital result. I think, and also, I have much more involvement in a digital image than I used to have. I mean, in the very early days, back in the 60s, when I was working with the Stones, I was doing all my own processing and all my printing in-house. But I mean, soon my focus was on taking pictures, and I got somebody in to do the processing, to do a lot of the printing, and I lost touch with that. And then in the 70s, we started using outside labs because they were more efficient, and because you could often have a shot, processed while you were still shooting and get stuff back. And so I lost contact with that side of things. And now, I can shoot digitally, and I've got them here, and I can start working on them. And I've even got, you can see behind me, I've got a large format printer, and I can make nice big, 24 by 30 prints. So it's much more in-house again, which I enjoy. But as I say, I don't like everybody looking at the picture, and I hate the pace of it. I hate that when you see a photographer shooting and they take something, they look at it, and it doesn't work for me. It never did. I mean, having said all that, when we were shooting film, we always shot Polaroid, and I used to shoot Polaroid until I got to a point where I felt that we were there. But it's not the same as looking at a digital image on a monitor and being able to zoom in on a filling in a tooth in your mouth or a pimple on the end of your nose. It's different.
I guess that also makes me wonder, how you feel about this new era where, stars are constantly available via social media and posting their own photos of themselves, and trying to share in a way that feels less artificial, but ultimately it still is all a show, in my opinion. Do you have any feelings about that?
It is show business after all. I mean, it always has been. Well, the posed non-pose has always been a problem. There were always the artists who would come to a studio and say, I don't want to pose. I don't want to pose. You can just shoot me now, shoot me. Or something. And I'd say, well, this is a pose. This is ridiculous. What? Do you want to cover your face? In that case, cover your face. But let me make it work so that it's the quality is nice and the lighting is nice. But you can't just wander around the studio and expect me to shoot you when you're not ready. That's just ridiculous. So quite regularly, a few times every year, there would be somebody like that. You'd have to educate them, sit them down and educate them and explain to them what was going on here, why they hadn't liked photography in the past. It was an educational process. Nowadays, I don't know. I photographed a band a couple of years ago, and I was asked to photograph them for a project, and I asked to see them. I hadn't seen them and there wasn't going to be an opportunity to meet them properly, which was disappointing, but that was that. So they sent me they sent me links to Facebook and Instagram and something else, MySpace, I guess, I can't remember. And all the photographs were incredibly amateur photographs, because photography has become, well, yeah, you know, anybody can take a picture with an Apple iPhone, and if it works, somebody will post it. If it doesn't work, somebody will post it too, I expect. But the pictures aren't very good, and often they aren't very good. And you can see that Facebook and other places are just littered with programs and gurus and books and different publications, all telling you how you can make your iPhoneography more professional. So it's become a big thing, and it devalues professional photography, I think, considerably. But I'm going to go back to this band. So they sent me these pictures and I got a sense of who they were, but there wasn't a single shot that I would have wanted used to promote me. But they didn't appear to have any professional photographs taken of them. Anyway, we did the session and they really enjoyed it. And they came up to me afterwards and they said, you know, we've never done a session like that before. And I said, well, you know, that's great, you know, but that's how I think it should be. That's certainly how I shoot a session. And they loved the pictures. And I really did half expect that they might ask me to do another session with them. And I never heard from them again. And I think that the problem is that what you were saying about a more spontaneous, a more natural approach seems to be more important to people than the sort of polished quality photography that I pursued for 50 years. I suppose really what I did is completely out of time now. It's out of date now. People look back at my pictures and they love them and they love the subjects and they love the quality of the photography. But actually, it doesn't really have a place anymore. And I think that in terms of storytelling, I don't know. I think that we're bombarded with a zillion images all the time. We don't have a moment to really study them. They just, oh, that's good, put it over there. That's good, no good, no good, no good, that's good, that's good. And I'm not really being very articulate about this, but I do feel that we've lost something. And of course I would feel that, you know, I'm a 76-year-old analog photographer with a 55-year career, and it's a new world, and the question of whether or not it's, I'll tell you a little story that relates to this. I was making my television series called about music photography, and one of the subjects was a very young, powerful female hip-hop singer, I suppose that's what she was, with a huge Instagram following. I mean, 1.2 million, I think she had, a big following. And she was saying that the images that are most popular are the images that she takes when she posts, when she's, I can't remember quite how she phrased it, but you know, she'd say, I'm ready for a photograph, and somebody would take a photograph of her and they'd post it and it would get 100,000 likes. And then she'd throw a picture of her making a cup of coffee in the kitchen and it would get 250,000 likes. And I think that illustrated this difference that's happening now, that yes, people want to see the stylized pose, but once that person is established in their minds as a hero, as a star, somebody they admire and follow, they want to see them on the lavatory. They want to see them making coffee. They want to, they want to see those real moments, because then those people become more like them. I don't know.
It's
Great
like
question.
they become their own paparazzi.
Yeah, maybe that's it. They've definitely become their own paparazzi. And even I remember in the 90s, certain artists wanting to really control their own photography, employ a full-time photographer, own everything, own the camera, own everything, and just have somebody press the trigger. That was happening in the 90s. And then digital, changed that, gave everybody a huge control, not just on the finished result, the whole sort of Photoshop, waist narrowing, butt enlarging, boob extending, whatever it was, but the control of the media, through social media. You control everything, not just how you look, but who sees it, where it's seen. So yeah, it's just, that's how it is, I guess.
I wonder, thinking about all these people that you photographed in the 60s and 70s and 80s, have you ever had a desire to go back and revisit those people? And obviously a lot of them you can't, but certainly some of them are still around, and they're definitely not as beautiful as they used to be, but they might still be interesting to see.
Well, yeah. I not really. I mean, yes, I think, I don't know. If they rang me up this afternoon and asked me if I'd like to photograph the Stones, would I do it? Or I don't know. I suppose I would. I don't know. But I don't really long for it, because no, I don't long for it. I don't really think about it very much. In fact, I did go back and photograph the Stones for a magazine in 1982, which was, let's say, 67 to 82. So it's a good 15 years later, and it was a fantastic experience, but it was an awful experience as well. I mean, it was a very strange experience. And I don't think you can go back. I mean, because the relationship that I had with my subjects is not something that you can recreate now. You couldn't do it now, and I think I'd be very disappointed, having to work. The Stones is the best example, because they're still going, albeit in a somewhat different form. But Mick and Keith are definitely there, and but I don't know whether I could cope with the layers around them. When I worked with them, we were all together. We were hand in hand. I was part of the gang. There was no difference between them and me. And we were sharing and doing everything together and experimenting together. It couldn't be like that now. It just couldn't be. And I think that would be disappointing. So I don't really want to be disappointed. I'd rather have such great memories and great photographs. And if I ever do photograph a band or a musician again, it will be a current artist, not some old, I was going to say fart, but I don't really mean that. Some old artist who I years ago. It wouldn't. I mean, I saw Mick and Charlie a few years back when they had their exhibitionism, their art exhibit, and I went to the opening of that, and I had a lot of things in it, and they were lovely. I mean, we embraced and hugged and laughed and giggled, and it was really lovely. But working with them would be a completely different thing, and I wouldn't want to do that.
Interesting. Well, Gered, I really appreciate your time today. It's great talking to you, and I think it was very insightful, and I appreciate your sharing all your observations.
Well, great, Dave. Thank you. I enjoyed it too. It's nice to be asked very different questions and to be thinking about it all afresh. So thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed myself.
The Story Talks Back is produced and hosted by Dave Stanton. The music you're hearing now was written and performed by Christopher Daydream. The theme music at the beginning of our show is an excerpt from Play by Merlin Twelfhoven, performed by Kronos Quartet as part of their 50 for the Future series. Please subscribe to The Story Talks Back on Podbean and check us out on Instagram. See you next time.